arrested 50 people at a party hosted by the Venezuelan violent gang Tren de Aragua.
DEA executed a warrant on drugs, and we found drugs, multiple different types of drugs. We found quite a lot of money, and we found several weapons as well. And in addition, let's just say approximately 50 people have been detained by ICE and transferred to the ICE detention facility.
In minutes, we'll speak with Joseph Humeyer, an expert on the violent gang, who's written a detailed report on how to take them down.
But first, Matt Finn has the very latest from Chicago for us. Hi, Matt. How are immigration operations unfolding out there, and where are they headed next?
Well, Sandra, there was a major operation here in Chicago yesterday. Tom Homan was on the ground, and a DHS official tells me that the next stop is going to be New York City. And Tom Homan tells Fox News that yesterday's sting removed multiple national security threats from the streets here in Chicago. That includes aggravated sex offenders, child predators, convicted murderers, members of the TDA gang, and a few collateral arrests. Homan praised the sweeping multi-agency immigration operation, FBI, DEA, ATF, ICE all involved. Also on the ground here was top DOJ official, acting Deputy U.S. Attorney General Emil Bove. Homan tells Fox it helped to have ATF on the ground, for example, when they busted an alleged TDA gang member who was selling switches, which convert guns into automatic weapons. In video obtained by Fox News, Homan thanks the teams and says the multi-agency operation was the first of its kind in the country.
Appreciate all the federal agencies here. Again, first one, all the government operations, no question from us throughout the nation. We're the first. Let's make this the best.
This afternoon, the front page of the Chicago Tribune reads, "We are terrified," referring to the immigration community here. And one local TV report said that schools and churches are being targeted. However, Homan and DHS tell Fox News that schools and churches are not being targeted. DHS says the new Trump policy that allows immigration arrests to be made in schools and churches uses common sense and is meant to prevent criminals from getting the idea that they can seek refuge in a church or a school. And on the topic of schools, on Friday, Chicago Public Schools created quite a stir. The CEO, Pedro Martinez, publicly stated that ICE agents showed up to an elementary school. A written press release was sent out as well. The story quickly spread, and even Illinois Governor Pritzker weighed in on X, writing in part, after a week of Republicans sowing fear and chaos, the first reports of raids in Chicago are at an elementary school. Well, it turns out ICE agents never visited the school. It was Secret Service who went there to investigate a juvenile who made alleged threats against President Trump. Chicago Public Schools had to retract its statement, and Tom Homan tells Fox News this afternoon that Governor Pritzker owes ICE an apology. Sandra, John.
All right, Matt Finn live out of Chicago for us with that news. Thank you, Matt.
All right, for more on the sweeping immigration enforcement blitz and Tren de Aragua specifically, let's bring in Joseph Humeyer, the executive director at Secure Free Society. You've also written a big report about Tren de Aragua published on heritage.org, the Heritage Foundation. Here's what you said in part, quote, "With a documented presence in no fewer than 20 U.S. states, the TDA is terrorizing urban and suburban communities throughout America. For the Venezuelan regime, that's the Maduro regime, the TDA is a tool of asymmetric warfare to destabilize countries while maintaining plausible deniability." So you're saying that this isn't just a bunch of people who are out there engaging in criminal activity. They're doing it at the behest of the Maduro regime to try to destabilize the U.S.
Absolutely, John. And what you're seeing today, not just with TDA, but with all the cartels, is they're not working like cartels anymore. They're working like weapons of warfare, like soldiers on a battlefield to invade territory, capture territory, steal the sovereignty of countries all throughout the Western Hemisphere. So TDA is the latest one that we've seen, but we also see the Mexican cartel. We also see MS-13. And what President Trump did with his executive order of designating the cartels and other TCOs as foreign terrorist organizations is he brought counter-transnational organized crime to the 21st century. For the longest time, fighting terrorism was a top priority of the United States. But fighting these cartels has to be a top priority because they work with terrorists. And in that order, he mentions asymmetric warfare, he mentions crime-terror convergence, and he mentions complex adaptive systems. These were concepts that were once only discussed within the intelligence community and the academic world. Now they're at the front of the executive power, and I think we're going to use all the elements of national power to go after them.
Tom Homan was sitting where you are about an hour ago, and he said to me, it was off camera, he said that's why the president is invoking the Alien Enemies Act, because gang members are acting at the behest of a foreign power.
Yeah, in the Alien Enemy Act, they mentioned something called predatory incursion. That's basically infiltration of a foreign country sent by aliens of another country. Venezuela is basically infiltrating the United States through its TDA members, and they're spreading. There's no way a gang goes from like a couple states in 1 year and within a couple years goes to about 23 states in a matter of months. That's not normal. It took the MS-13 decades to do that. So this is something that's been put on steroids by a specific governments that have basically weaponized migration to bring down the United States. And I think now we have a night and day difference because now Tom Homan and others, President Trump, are taking the fight to these cartels, and they're doing it in a very smart way.
Here's what Tom Homan said about the enforcement actions against TDA members over the weekend. Listen here.
Yesterday, during the operation I was part of, I can tell you we arrested more than 9 TDA members, Tendagua members. A couple of them are being criminally prosecuted because one of them was selling weapons. Here's an illegal alien gang member in the United States selling guns, illegal guns, to other gang members. And some of these guns had what they call switch. The switch is added to the gun to make it fully automatic. It turns a Glock handgun into a machine gun. So we arrest a lot of TDA members.
So here's what you wrote about enforcement. Obviously, you can arrest them in American cities, but then what to do with them is a problem. You said, quote, deporting Venezuelan migrants arrested for violent crimes is a priority and a challenge given the Maduro regime does not accept deportation flights. However, it must be understood that keeping specific TDA leaders in U.S. prisons runs a high risk of these leaders applying the know-how of creating a hybrid criminal governance model learned in Venezuela's prisons to the U.S. penitentiary system, making the TDA stronger in America. So, I mean, you're caught between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah.
You can't deport them back to Venezuela. Homan said, well, maybe we can send them somewhere else. But you also don't want to put them in U.S. prisons because this is a gang that grew out of the Venezuelan prison system, and they'll do that here in America.
No, absolutely. I think we're going to have to be very creative with our diplomatic solutions. It's going to take a whole of government approach. It's not just going to be our border authorities like Tom Homan. It'll be our Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, our Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, and all the elements of the Trump administration to basically talk to our partners in Latin America. TDA is not just a problem for the United States. It's a problem for the entire Western Hemisphere. And we have to apply the America First principle of burden sharing to basically share the burden of all these members. And I think there's conversations perhaps with El Salvador and other countries that potentially send these gang members to another country. If you're a TDA member, think about this.
Yeah, but if you're El Salvador or Guatemala, why would you take in TDA members?
Well, because you're
knowing what they did here.
Well, because you have a lessons learned in Salvador about how to deal with gang members, how they're taking care of the MS-13. If you're a TDA member, you do not want to go to that mega president in El Salvador. You're watching what he's done to MS-13, and you're thinking twice about your actions here in this country. So there's a signaling mechanism to this as well. And I think this is really basically peace through strength. We're showing strength to all the gangs in the country, making them on notice, and knowing that they're not going to be able to do their weapons of mayhem anymore.
Well, it's a very comprehensive report that you've written. If you want to look it up, it's on heritage.org. Really good reading. Now this. Thanks, Joseph.
Thanks, John.
There were a lot of younger people who said, you know, this is a government vaccine, at least government funded, and they don't completely trust the government. Imagine that. And on principle, they said, we don't want to take the vaccine.
President Trump making good on his promise to reinstate service members kicked out of the military for opting out of the COVID vaccine. Jennifer Griffin is reporting on this live from the Pentagon. Big news, Jennifer. So what did the new defense secretary say this morning before his first day on the job?
Well, Sandra, it's already been a very busy day here at the Pentagon. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth was met on the steps of the Pentagon by Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General C.Q. Brown.
And today, there are more executive orders coming that we fully support on removing DEI inside the Pentagon, reinstating troops who were pushed out because of COVID mandates, Iron Dome for America. This is happening quickly.
An executive order for a new space-based missile defense shield for the U.S. homeland. Another executive order is expected to ban transgender troops from serving in the military, according to the New York Post, and could impact an estimated 14,700 transgender troops already serving, according to the Palm Center, whose research military officials pointed us to. An executive order to reinstate with back pay the 8,000 U.S. troops separated from service for refusing to take the COVID vaccine during the pandemic. Congress forced the Biden administration to rescind the mandate in 2023 when the U.S. Navy reached out to all 1,878 sailors who had been separated. Only 2 wanted to rejoin the Navy.
The warfighters are ready to go. There's an emergency at the southern border.
The new defense secretary used the prior names for two bases named after Confederate generals whose names were changed by Congress in 2020 and issued this order barring diversity, equity, and inclusion from the Pentagon. Hegseth was asked whether he planned to follow through with threats he made before becoming defense secretary to fire General C.Q. Brown.
Handle with it right now. Look forward to working with him. Thank you.
Still an open question about the fate of the Pentagon's Inspector General, one of the 17 independent IGs who were fired by President Trump this weekend. He was Senate confirmed 92-3 and recently oversaw highly critical reports on Defense Secretary Austin's secret hospital stay, gaps in oversight over U.S. weapons to Ukraine, and other waste, fraud, and abuse here at the Pentagon. Sandra.
Jen Griffin live on that for us. Big news all around. Jennifer, thank you very much. John, obviously this affects a lot of people, and when it comes to reinstating those that lost their jobs because of not taking the vaccine, in the back pay too, huge story for all those people.
Yeah, particularly when you think of where we are with the vaccine right now compared to where we were, 3-4 years ago, it does seem wholly unfair that they would have lost their jobs because they refused to take the vaccine for whatever reasons that they did, because there are a lot of people who say they'll never take another vaccine ever again. It will be interesting to see what happens with General C.Q. Brown as well. He's still got another 2.5 years left on his term. President Trump has talked about replacing him. Hegseth seemed to indicate that he was looking forward to working with him, so we'll see what happens.
We will.
I've had an opportunity to spend some time with him. He's a good guy. President Trump has not given up his fight to redefine birthright citizenship. Where is the legal battle headed next? We'll cover that for you.
And it's only been a week, but Trump has already made some major changes. Is there more to come? Former federal prosecutor Brett Tolman will join us next. All right, this new video just in. Pop singer and actress Selena Gomez appears to be responding to the Trump administration's immigration raids over the weekend. Take a look.
I just wanted to say that I'm so sorry. All my people are getting attacked. The children. I don't understand. I'm so sorry. I wish I could do something, but I can't. I don't know what to do. I'll try everything, I promise.
That video has gone viral, and it was on her Instagram. It has since come down. Stories last about 24 hours, so it is now down from her account. But we had Tom Homan, the border czar, on the top of 1 o'clock hour, and we asked him to react to that, and he said this.
I don't think we arrested any families. We've arrested public safety threats and national security threats, bottom line. If they don't like it, then go to Congress and change the law. We're going to do this operational apology. We're going to make our community safer. We're going to save. Once we lock that border on continuous operation, you're going to see fentanyl deaths decrease, illegal alien crime decrease, sex trafficking decrease. It's just all for the good of this nation, and we're going to keep going. No apologies. We're moving forward.
It's getting a lot of reaction, as you can imagine, John, and the whole social media atmosphere, things like that can go quite viral. And you have to be reminded of the fact that a majority of Americans do support these deportations of those who pose public safety threats, criminals, members of this violent gang, Tren de Aragua. There is a lot of public support for this happening. So I have noticed that she hasn't put that video back up, but a lot of people are talking about it.
Maybe she's discovered that Tren de Aragua members are not, quote, her people, you know? I don't know, but I just can't figure out the whole social media thing. It's because I'm old, I know. I don't get why you post video of yourself crying.
Well, you know, there was a question asked by someone who worked into the first Trump administration who said, did she shed tears for Laken Riley when he reposted that clip?
That's a good point.
And I think that there's a good question to be asked there. Where were they then? That University of Georgia nursing student who was killed by somebody who never should have been here in the first place. And this administration says in these raids, their purpose and their target are people like that, have criminal records, who are members of a violent gang.
Yeah, well, I will only get myself in trouble if I comment on somebody's social media post. So I will only say that Tom Homan has been on this program many, many times, and he said that targeting threats to our national security is the #1 priority of the Trump administration. And so far, because we've done ride-alongs with them in various cities across this country, in Boston, we were there with them in Chicago, the people that ICE is arresting are people who you probably would not want living in your neighborhood because they're engaged in crime. And you heard what Joseph Humeyer said. All these trendy Aragua members are acting at the behest of the Maduro regime in Venezuela. The goal is to destabilize the United States of America. Is that something that you support happening in this country?
Yeah.
I would posit that most people wouldn't.
And this is also to disincentivize bad guys from coming here anymore. So it's all part of the plan that was pitched to voters that they elected this new president to do.
All right. I promise I will never, ever put on my feed me crime. President Trump is continuing his fight to change birthright citizenship. The Justice Department reworking its argument after a ruling last week temporarily blocking Trump's executive order. Brett Tolman with reaction to that coming up soon. But first, Justice correspondent David Spunt with the latest on all of this. And David, how is the Trump administration planning to fight the challenge?
John, they want to do this through the old-fashioned legal process through the courts, federal court, maybe all the way up to the Supreme Court. You could do it and get rid of birthright citizenship or change it by amending the 14th Amendment to the Constitution, changing it, but they want to do this through the courts. Here's the vice president yesterday on birthright citizenship.
If you come here on vacation and you have a baby in an American hospital, that baby doesn't become an American citizen. If you're an illegal alien and you come here temporarily, hopefully, your child does not become an American citizen by virtue of just having been born on American soil.
Last week, a federal judge in Seattle swiftly blocked an executive order that would redefine birthright citizenship. The judge called the president's order, quote, blatantly unconstitutional. He put a 14-day freeze on that order. It ends next week. 22 states sued in separate lawsuits.
This is step one, but to hear the judge from the bench say that in his 40 years as a judge, he has never seen something so blatantly unconstitutional, sets the tone for the seriousness of this effort.
And this restraining order sets the administration on a likely path to the Supreme Court. Last week, House Republicans introduced a bill to end birthright citizenship. But even if that became law, that may not be enough because, as I mentioned, it's in the Constitution's 14th Amendment, adopted in 1868. It reads in part, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and the state wherein they reside. DOJ is focusing on John and subject to the jurisdiction thereof. They believe they can win this case. There's a hearing next week in Seattle on the merits of this case before that same Seattle judge. John.
Yeah, all right. Well, you know, Senator Jacob Howard, who was the man who talked a lot about the 14th Amendment, said clearly it doesn't apply to foreigners who are in this country, like foreign diplomats and things. But back then, they didn't have the problem that we have right now. So as Carrie Bond was saying the other day, she said, we're looking at what happened in 1868 through a very 2025 lens, and it's kind of difficult to square that circle. But we'll see where this goes in the courts. David, thank you. Sandra?
All right, John, thank you. Let's bring in Brett Tolman now, a former federal prosecutor and former U.S. attorney for Utah. Brett, great to have you here. Want to ask you where you think this goes.
Sandra, John, thanks for having me. I will tell you that this is a fascinating issue. And, you know, it's ironic to hear folks on the left argue that this is blatantly unconstitutional. You saw Biden issue executive order after executive order that was clearly out of step with the law and with precedent. And what was their answer? Their answer was, we're allowed to test it. And there's some accuracy to that. They can test the limits of the law and define and refine it. In this instance, subject to the jurisdiction has exceptions to it, and we know that. So this is a perfect test for the Supreme Court to actually give us guidance. What does it mean? Because it was not anticipated that it meant that everybody that stepped foot in the United States, if they had a child, that child would immediately become a citizen. So that's why we need the Supreme Court.
Okay, on this attempt, Senator Lindsey Graham went on the Sunday show Meet the Press over the weekend and said this.
I think there's a good chance. I introduced legislation to end birthright citizenship years ago. It's a magnet for legal immigration. Here's what I learned yesterday. I didn't know. There were about 250,000 people born in this country to illegal immigrants and got the benefit of birthright citizenship. That's 7% of all the babies born in the country. I think it's a cheap way to award citizenship. You should not be a citizen simply because you were born here.
All right, so he obviously, the senator, sees a sound legal argument here, Brett.
There is. There's a legal argument that needs to be explored. We do make exceptions. You referenced the diplomat that comes over, and that's because they've identified that that individual is not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. The same can be argued. The legal argument is there to say an individual that is a citizen of another country is not subject to necessarily to our jurisdiction just because they were born here. That's the fine tuning of that law. And look, Sandra, this goes all the way back to an 1800s ruling by the Supreme Court when there was nothing like what we see now, where there's a concerted effort to get into the United States immediately to have the child here in order to take advantage of all that we have in the United States. That is a problem, and we have to address it in the courts.
Okay, so I want to ask you about officials wasting no time in the Justice Department's rightward shift, as it is put in the Wall Street Journal today, replacing a Biden-era memo telling prosecutors to show leniency to some drug offenders with a new policy calling for the pursuit of the most serious charges and the stiffest penalties for all crimes. They halted much of the department's civil rights and environmental work, and they transferred more than 15 career employees to relatively marginal positions, part of a broader effort to ultimately thin the workforce. That was just the first week. Brett, it does look like big changes are happening and big changes are coming.
Yeah, what's interesting about this is for decades prior to Obama administration and the Biden administration, there was a consistency, and the consistency was the Department of Justice was to pursue the highest provable offenses. That's the rule, the policy in the Department of Justice. Obama and Biden changed that. Not only did they change that, they then pulled back all of the resources that we have typically seen used to prosecute the most dangerous that come into this country. I prosecuted personally hundreds of these cases of individuals who were very dangerous, who committed crimes, serious crimes here in the United States, and we would prosecute them and deport them. That stopped. And if anyone wants to know why we're in trouble now, it's not because, we want to do something new. We actually want to do what we were mandated to do for decades in this country in the Department of Justice and enforce the rule of law at our borders.
Brett, always good to have you on. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, John.
A Chinese AI app, Sandra, is sending U.S. stocks reeling. Why? It's raising concerns over American dominance in AI.
Plus, pulling back the curtains on the origins of COVID, what the CIA now says was the likely cause of the pandemic. We're breaking it all down with one of John Ratcliffe's highest-ranking former deputies. Next.
It's been clear to me for 5 years, and I think it's increasingly clear to many other people, and certainly the CIA, the FBI, the Department of Energy, and most people just around the world, that the by far most likely origin of COVID-19 is a lab accident in Wuhan.
This from the CIA, the agency releasing a report suggesting COVID most likely started from a lab leak in China. Alex Hoff is live in Washington. She's got more on that for us. So, Alex, why now has new evidence come out?
Well, Sandra, it doesn't appear so based on the CIA statement. The new position came from a deeper examination of existing intelligence. A spokesperson tells Fox the CIA assesses with low confidence that a research-related origin of the COVID-19 pandemic is more likely than a neutral origin based on the available body of reporting. Newly confirmed CIA Director John Ratcliffe points out that this updated CIA assessment was not influenced by politics. So the timing here simply came down to him getting on the job and then releasing this information, choosing to declassify it his first day on the job, actually, agreeing with President Trump that Americans deserve transparency.
The purpose of the CIA is to protect Americans, to keep us safe from foreign threats and foreign adversaries. But we also need to be truthful with Americans. And he has stressed to me and others that, these aren't mutually exclusive missions.
For years, you'll remember the CIA said it didn't have enough evidence to make a determination on COVID-19's origin. During that time, those who floated the lab leak theory were cast off by the mainstream as conspiracy peddling. While testifying last year, Dr. Anthony Fauci denied allegations that he tried to suppress information in order to sway Americans into believing, as he did, that the virus came from an animal.
I keep an open mind. I feel, based on the data that I have seen, that the more likely, not definitive, but the more likely explanation is a natural spillover from an animal reservoir.
Well, the CIA now joins the FBI and Energy Department in favoring the lab leak theory. According to the agency, this assessment could change if there is any new evidence. Sandra.
All right, Alex Hoff in Washington on that for us. Alex, thank you. John.
All right, Sandra, let's bring in Cliff Sims, former Deputy Director of National Intelligence under John Ratcliffe. Cliff, good to see you again. It's been a while. It's been a minute. Good to have you back.
John, thank you for having me.
So here's what Ratcliffe told Shannon Bream on Fox News Sunday yesterday about this report regarding the origins of COVID. Listen here.
I had the opportunity on my first day to make public an assessment that actually took place in the Biden administration. So it can't be accused of being political, and it does assess. The CIA has assessed that the most likely cause of this pandemic that has wrought so much devastation around the world was because of a lab-related incident in Wuhan. And so we'll continue to investigate that moving forward.
The assessment is, quote, low confidence, and the Chinese deny it, but this is a big turnaround for that agency.
It's a huge turnaround. And in fact, for the past 5 years, one of the big questions in the national security world was, why is the CIA continuing to sit on the sideline? I mean, this is the world's preeminent intelligence agency with a reach that far outstrips really anybody else in the world. And yet you had the Energy Department coming out and making an assessment before them. You had the FBI, which is a domestic intelligence service, coming out and making an assessment before the CIA. And really, the conclusion that Director Ratcliffe, that I had come to, that others had come to, was simply that the Biden administration did not want to deal with the geopolitical implications of the CIA, the world's preeminent intelligence agency, making such an assessment. We saw the Biden administration waffling back and forth all over the place during the last 4 years in terms of their policy toward China. And I think this just really puts a marker in the ground that this administration is willing to just tell the truth about the Communist Party, about their culpability in COVID. I think it's a credit to President Trump and a credit to John Ratcliffe that on day one when he got in there, this is one of the first things that he did was help the CIA live up to the words that are carved onto the wall of its headquarters, "Ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free."
All right, well, let's hope that that's the case. I want to get in the Wayback Machine for a second. Take you and the audience back 5 years to the East Room at the White House when I had this exchange with President Trump.
My question is, have you seen anything at this point that gives you a high degree of confidence that the Wuhan Institute of Virology was the origin of this virus?
Yes, I have. Yes, I have. And I think that the World Health Organization should be ashamed of themselves because they're like the public relations agency for China.
Are you suggesting that maybe you have some evidence that this was not a naturally occurring virus?
We're going to see what it is. You're talking about the virus and
Correct.
where it came from?
Yeah.
No, we're going to see where it is. We're going to see where it comes from.
What gives you a high degree of confidence that this originated from the Wuhan Institute of Virology?
I can't tell you that. I'm not allowed to tell you that.
Saw my wife whispering in my ear there. So he said he believed it would happen, but and that's where it came from, but he would not tell us the reasons why. But Cliff, back then, anybody who embraced the idea of a lab leak theory was dismissed as a tinfoil hat-wearing conspiracy theorist. But now you have the FBI
exactly right.
and the CIA and so many other, the Energy Department all saying, no, this is where it came from, with low confidence.
No, that's right. I mean, I can't help but remember Tom Cotton submitting an op-ed to the New York Times on this exact topic and him being excoriated as a racist for even, daring to say this might have been a possibility. This is just another in a long list of things that Donald Trump was right about. Even back when we were there in the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, the body of reporting that existed and all of the intelligence streams that we had, even then suggested that this was the place that the virus had come from. John Ratcliffe has said over and over again, the lab leak theory is the only theory that is supported by the intelligence, by science, and by common sense. I mean, even Jon Stewart, hardly a conservative, went on a late-night talk show at one point and was like, if there was an outbreak of chocolatey goodness in Hershey, Pennsylvania, where would we say it came from, John? Oh, I don't know. Maybe the Hershey factory right down the road. And yet we have a virus that leaked, that originated in Wuhan, China. Nobody disputes that. And the Wuhan Virology Institute is right down the street, and we're going to act like that's not the obvious place it came from. I'm glad to see the CIA get off the sidelines finally here and show what we all knew all along.
As you mentioned, some things are just common sense. I want to ask you about this new DeepSeek AI program that China released, which is roiling the tech markets here in the United States. They say that they could do it faster, they could do it cheaper, but of course, as always, the devil is in the details. And we talk about these AI programs, and if you put garbage in, you get garbage out, and people might want to rethink where they're getting their information from, because our reporters have done some queries here of DeepSeek, asking what happened during the 1989 Tiananmen Square protest. DeepSeek, sorry, that's beyond my current scope. Let's talk about something else. Is Xi Jinping a good leader? Sorry, that's beyond my current scope. Let's talk about something else. Tell me about the Uyghurs. Same response. So then the question, is Taiwan a country? Which if you ask GPT or Grok, they say the status of Taiwan is a complex and sensitive issue. Not so DeepSeek, which says Taiwan is an inalienable part of China. There's no such thing as Taiwanese independence. The Chinese government adheres to the one China principle, opposes any form of Taiwan independence. It goes on and on and on and on. But I mean, again, garbage in, garbage out here. And maybe this isn't the great threat that everybody is saying it is.
Well, I find it very interesting that it says that these questions are outside of its scope. It's pretty obvious that the scope of DeepSeek R1 is whatever Xi Jinping and the Chinese Communist Party wants it to be. And so it's a little disconcerting that this is the #1 app in the free app store right now, because you see this is not a reliable place to get any meaningful information. But John, I do think this is an important moment. Mark Andreessen, who's one of the world's preeminent technologists, said on Twitter or on X today that this is a Sputnik moment. As you recall, Sputnik in 1957 was when the Soviets launched a satellite into orbit before we did, and it took us by surprise. So what you're seeing in the markets today is a reaction to this Chinese company's claims that, #1, they have reached this level of capability at a fraction of the cost of what OpenAI and others here in the United States have done, and with a fraction of the computing capacity that they did it with. Now, that's important. This AI race is going to be the defining technology race of the time, so we've got to get the national will to win this. But it's also important to remember the Chinese may not be telling the truth about how they pulled this off and with what resources they did it.
Please, you think the Chinese are going to lie to us? Cliff, I'm surprised.
I know you're stunned, John.
Cliff, good to see you. And while I was alive during the Sputnik moment, I don't recall it. I was too young. Thank you so much for reminding me. Appreciate it. Sandra?
All right, John. President Trump in South Florida ahead of the annual Republican retreat. He is set to speak at a high-profile policy conference. That is expected to happen later today. We are live in Doral. Coming up, plus this.
I tried to save his life. I was the only one trying to save his life.
I have never seen a movement around someone accused of murder like this.
Karen Reed speaking out about her Massachusetts murder trial. Is she a cold-blooded killer or the victim of a cover-up? Judge Janine has a new Fox Nation special on the case, and she is here to talk about it. Coming up next.
All right, it is a trial that captured America's attention, and it's about to get a sequel. Karen Reed headed back to court, charged again with the murder of her boyfriend, Boston police officer John O'Keefe. Prosecutors say she's a ruthless killer, but her defense says she's the victim of a cover-up. Let's bring in Judge Janine Pirro, co-host of The Five and a host of a brand new Fox Nation special, Karen Reed, Killer or Convenient Outsider. The nation has been intrigued by this case. What are you going to tell us, Judge?
Well, you know, first of all, it was a 9-week trial, and took the jury 5 days to deliberate and decide. They couldn't figure out what happened. So you know that there's a lot on both sides here. But look, she was charged with second-degree murder. She was charged with vehicular manslaughter while she was drunk and leaving the scene of an accident where there is a homicide. All right. They are scheduled to go back to trial on April the 1st. The defense is claiming there is excessive prosecutorial overreach. I don't see that at all. Neither did the judge. Surprise. But this is what this case is about. Karen Reed is dating this cop, John O'Keefe. Apparently, it's somewhat of a rocky relationship, and she admits that on the night of January 28th, they went drinking at a bar. They go drinking at a bar. She orders 9 drinks. She says it pays for him. She says she didn't drink them all, but apparently she admits to the police that after she and John left the bar, that she admits she was arguing with John as she was taking him to an after party where their bunch of cops who apparently are still drinking. She says she drops him off at 12:45, and he doesn't come home. So the next morning, she calls two girlfriends to go looking for him. She doesn't go looking for him for herself. I would ask you this, Sandra, if your boyfriend didn't come home, wouldn't you like run out and say, where is he? As opposed to calling two girlfriends?
Two friends, yeah.
But she did say to one girlfriend, did I hit him? Could I have hit him? I hit him. All right, but let's talk about the cause of death. The cause of death is extreme blunt force trauma to his head. So the prosecution is saying, look, this guy, this cop O'Keefe, was hit in the head by her backing into him. In fact, his DNA is on the tail light. His hair is in the bumper of his SUV. And because of vehicle data that we have now, we know at 12:45 when she allegedly dropped him off, after she admits fighting with him, she backed 60 feet at 24 miles an hour. He ends up with all this trauma to his head. And on the bumper is a drink that he was carrying. He was seen leaving the bar with, and it's on the bumper, and you've got him dying not only of the blunt force trauma, but of hypothermia. He froze to death there and then. What's her defense? Well, the cops are framing me, of course. They should have seen when they left the house that night that he was sprawled out. Hogwash, he wasn't sprawled out. He was where she left him.
Let me play some of the Fox Nation clip. This is a promo clip on claims of conspiracy to that point. Listen.
Defense attorneys claim others caused O'Keefe's death and conspired with investigators to make Reed the scapegoat.
If you wondered what corruption looks like, that's what corruption looks like.
We started to realize this is nefarious, this is intentional. They're not trying to get to the truth, they're trying to frame my friend.
So, there you have it.
There you have it. I mean, don't the police try to frame everyone in a homicide? I mean, here's the problem. When you have evidence, when you have DNA, when you have motive, when you have admissions, they were fighting. Did I kill him? His hair, his DNA is on the bumper. We know the bumper went backwards. He was there. Come on.
There is so much fanfare around this trial. I know you talk about that in your piece, but I mean, there are people showing up at the courthouse. They're holding up signs.
Yeah.
Like they truly believe one way or another.
Reason they are taken to her. Yeah. But here's the problem. When you really buy into it, as she apparently is doing, she's showing up every day and waving, it's that celebrity thing has gotten to her. I'll be very interested in seeing what happens with the next jury trial. But you have to see the Fox Nation special. It is amazing. If I say so myself.
You're
Karen
amazing,
Reed.
Judge. Thank you so much.
No,
we'll be
thank
watching
you.
this. Karen Reed, killer or convenient outsider? Thank you very much, Judge.
Good to see you.
All right, we'll see you at 5. John.
I've never known the judge to do anything that falls short of amazing. House Republicans gearing up for their annual issues conference, and President Trump is set to play a huge role. We are live with the preview coming up next. House Republicans are way down south for their annual issues conference. President Trump expected to address all things policy while hosting the group at his golf club in Doral, Florida. Our senior national correspondent is there ahead of the big event. Aisha Hasni is with us. You just talked to Trump while he was having lunch. How was his golf game this morning?
It was like, John, I was in the right place at the right time. He had just gotten off the golf course after a round of golf. He was coming in for lunch. I was having lunch, and he just so happened to sit in a table right next to where I was sitting. So I said, hello, Mr. President, how are you? And he asked me how I was doing. He said, we had a great week. And then we talked a little bit. He said he will see me at 5 o'clock, which is when he will address the House GOP conference during this their annual issues conference here in Doral. And the main goal here, John, of this week is to really unify this conference behind the president's agenda, his very ambitious agenda. Remember, he hosted a couple of different factions of the GOP conference in Mar-a-Lago not too long ago, and they spoke about his preference for that one big, beautiful bill, which would include all of his priorities, like expanding his tax cuts, border security, and also energy legislation. But the House Freedom Caucus, John, continues to divert from Speaker Johnson's plan by lobbying for 2 packages. Okay, I think that I think that we lost the soundbite there, John, but Trump has said he's open to doing 2 separate bills. We'll see what happens after he speaks with the GOP conference. John.
All right. Well, maybe he was just keeping his counsel close to his vest. All right. Well, good you had a conversation with him, Aisha. We'll see you again soon. We'll be right back. Stay with us.
Go.
That's going to wrap it up for us today. We're off to a fast start for the week, don't you think?
Absolutely. Like drinking from a fire hose.